Composition techniques for cool portraits. All right, here we go. Here's one of my very favorites, I have to admit. Anything odd, anything unique, that's me. That's what I try and shoot for. Okay, so here we have a quite old picture that uniquely uses shadows to kind of create a silhouette. And in a way, it captures the essence of him. It's kind of rebellious and young and, okay, so it's not graffiti, it's what we call moss graffiti, which basically means that you draw moss in the shape of different objects, like an anarchy symbol, and then it grows, and it's really good for the environment. It's like blended moss and yogurt. Anyways, you can do that, and it kind of has that sheen, and it makes it look like it's graffiti, but it's actually not. Okay, so let me get to my go-to tricks. Go-to tricks include shadows, which is what I just showed you one example of. Another one is glow-in-the-dark paint splatters. I haven't done a lot with this, so I took one from a photo from Splash, Unsplash, I mean. It's actually a commercial copyright-free photo place. Also, smoke bomb photography. You wouldn't think you could use smoke bombs for really cool photography, especially for portraits, but you can. Trust me, seniors love it, and we're going to see some examples of this and much more in just a bit. Some examples of other people's works and some of mine. Alright, and now we also have sparklers. Sparklers? Yes, sparklers. Alright, so here is an example of the glow-in-the-dark paint splatters. Now, I'm not sure how good it is for your skin, but this wouldn't be a very long photo shoot. So you get your face all splattered with the glow-in-the-dark paint, you walk around in the sunlight for a while, and then you get your camera on long exposure with your tripod, and definitely night photography settings. I wouldn't recommend this if you haven't done night photography before, but you can see the really up-close details of her eyelashes, and it just creates this really unique portrait that you don't see in everyday portrait photography. I've been wanting to do a lot more with this, but I need to. Right. Use street art to your advantage. Now, if you were in the last couple of lectures, in the beginning lecture I showed you a picture of Adam that I took. Now this is one he actually took of me. So street art can add this really nice pop that can be in contrast to somebody if, for example, that somebody is wearing all neutrals like I'm wearing, all black and gray. And so that makes the subject and the graffiti really pop. So this is a place in Ann Arbor, Michigan, actually. And yeah, so go ahead and use that kind of graffiti, wild looking arts to your advantage to bring out your subject in neutrals. Here you go. Abandoned fairs work well as well. Here's Adam again. Seniors love their portraits, like I said, behind graffiti and trains. This is an abandoned fair in Atlantic City, and it's kind of blurred out, but it still made a really interesting, almost kind of dark background for the portrait. He looks pretty happy to be in front of the abandoned fair. He was, okay. Here's an example of the smoke bomb photography. You can hold the smoke bomb. I've seen it where you put it behind couples, and I've really wanted to try this where you can kind of have two people with smoke bombs in their hands. I'd recommend leather gloves if you're going to handle hot smoke bombs, safety reasons, and to make a heart around the couple in like a pink smoke bomb. I've always wanted to do that. I'm doing engagement photos soon, so it will be my perfect chance to do that. So I like how they matched the blue with the other blues. It's a little bit lighter blue for the smoke. You can also do the opposites on the color wheel. We might talk about that more in another lecture. Alright, and here we have an example of a sparkler. This is a nice commercial photo from Unsplash, and she probably is on some sort of night setting. I've done one with my best friend kind of swirling a sparkler, and it just kind of shows that, you are not afraid to have fun. So if somebody is not afraid to have fun, they still love glow sticks, sparklers, just the little fun things in life. They're really cute for that. And one more I wanted to add is especially for senior pictures, for girls or guys alike, if that's what you are into, glitter Or leaves. Throw something up into the air or put it in your hair and just use it as a prop, and it's kind of beautiful in here. It almost looks like snow. All right, and we're ready to move on to lecture 5. Tips for better backgrounds in portrait photos. Oh man, this lecture started out with a boring background. It's white, it's plain, there is nothing interesting about it. Not good on my part. Okay, so let's look at some interesting backgrounds. The worn but muted brick. Alright, so this is a favorite of seniors for portraits, kind of edgy or worn down or even kind of country style portraits. It's great if you just go to your local downtown city and find some old brick buildings. It's not hard, and it makes a really interesting but kind of neutral textured background. So don't be afraid to use old buildings to your advantage, especially downtown. All right. So here's an example I found. Now, it is a nice portrait, but I think that they could have done a little bit better compositionally as far as the colors go. So don't use similar colors too close together. So orange and red are, in my opinion, way too close to the color wheel to be used right next to each other. And so it kind of takes away from her shirt, kind of takes away from her. And I really wish it had all been that kind of blue, whatever light or blurred out thing it is in the background. I'm not sure, but the teal is a really nice complement to her orange shirt. So go with opposites on the color wheel. So what I mean by that is if you look in any kind of art book or even Google the color wheel, you'll see that I believe it's blue and orange are opposites. No, not blue and orange, sorry, blue and red, something like that, and orange and purple. And so those are pretty far away from each other on the color wheel. They're not super close colors. They're what they call complementary colors. And so you want to use those as much as you can. So don't try and not do too many warm and warm or cool and cool colors. Try and mix them up and put the opposites next to each other as far as that goes. Or ask an art major. Alright. And don't add too much of the same color. So once again, this is a cool portrait. It's a nice relaxed pose. I like her facial expression. I like how she used the blue jean and the blue ring to contrast the orange. So she used the color wheel, kind of like what I talked about. It is blue and orange, by the way. But I feel like using so much orange in her shirt and pants in the background kind of takes away from her red hair. It takes away from the interest and the uniqueness that brings to the table. You know, it's like less than 2% of the population has red hair. So why not bring it out? So what would bring out her hair more is if we had a blue wall and that was the background, because that's the opposite. So that would be cool. And do use opposites. So I like how there's a white background and then she has kind of a black glittery skirt and a black shirt, and so that definitely brings attention to her outfit, which I think is what she was going for. So that's a really interesting thing to do as far as more of a fashion portrait picture goes. I think this is more of what I would consider fashion portrait photography rather than a focus on her face, although it does show a lot of personality in this one. Alright, here's another thing, a big no-no. Avoid clutter, avoid trash cans, please, especially trash cans, and ideally cars. So this is a nice photo, although the subject is centered, they could have made it a little less centered. The blurred house is fine in the background. It's just if you look to the far left, if you can see there's that brown garbage can or disposal recycle can, whatever. That's not what you want to see in your photos. You don't want to see half a car, or you don't want to see the random thing on your porch. And so I'd recommend just changing the angle, even if those things are within your line of sight. Just change the angle so you can't see them in the photos you take, please. You know, I mean, you can move around stuff in your house, but a photo lasts forever. This isn't a bad example at all, and like I said, it is blurred out, but it would look even better if you just didn't have those things. Okay. And so here's an example of the opposite of that, where it's just her here. Oh, sorry about the little bit of a window you saw. So you can see, you can focus on her nails, the shirt, and her hair, and everything is neutral. That's not her, you know, the windows, and even if that is a garage, you can't really tell. And there's some nice rustic wood, but everything is kind of in the tan and white range, and so it really brings attention to her and her happy personality. This is a really nice senior photo. So thank you for coming to lecture 5. Lighting skills for amazing portraits. So in a previous lecture, I already talked about how you don't really want that backlighting, which backlighting basically means there's a super bright light source behind your subject, which in this case is a person, mostly if we're talking about portrait photography. But then I found this really interesting photo that I liked the backlighting in. So I'd say there is a very small amount of cases where you do want backlighting, and it's only in those unique photographs. So it can make an amazing portrait, but I'd say 90% of the time, a really large dose of sunlight or light behind the subject isn't good. But this isn't really as much backlighting because the sun is kind of above the building. So it's not entirely behind her, it's just at the very top. And I love how it just kind of makes her hair almost look like fire on the ends. It brings out that color, yet from kind of her neck down, it's more of a normal lighting. And so here is another place where I want to say, use natural lighting whenever possible. Now I know if you're doing corporate photos or, for example, headshots in an inside studio, you can't use natural lighting, you can only mimic it. But whenever you can get natural lighting, even like I said, if it's in a corporate photo and the people are in front of the windows at their, say, accounting building. I almost said facility. I don't know. I don't work in an accounting building. I'm going to say building. Then that would be great. Yeah, natural lighting is the most flattering. All right. Use interesting shadows too. So I really love how in this picture she's kind of relaxed, almost in a meditative pose on the end of her boat. It's like a travel picture, but you can see that the trees are creating a shadow on her entire body. So using interesting shadows is encouraged, but she's still generally well lit. You can see her face well, you can see her hair fairly well, so you can see all of her. But it just creates a new layer and another, I guess I want to say, element of texture that I really think that you should try and explore. Make sure the entirety of the subject is well lit, like I said. So this is kind of a cool, reminds me of the 50s. I love this one that I found. Make it sure it's well lit, unless you're proving a point with shadows. So you can see here, not proving a point with shadows, proving a 50s retro point here. She's proving a texture point, and that's actually created by blinds from the windows open a certain amount, and I really like indoor pictures like this. Like I said, avoid backlighting in most cases, unless you have a way to control the light, like an external flash, like we talked about in the more technical portrait photography discussion. Most backlighting is either way too dark or way too light. But this photo does kind of draw your eye in. I wouldn't consider it really a portrait photo. Some people might say it captures her personality, but I'm going to vote no. I'm going to say it's more of an effect than it is capturing her as a person. So you want to remember to capture the person before you go for those interesting effects. So backlighting, like I said, usually not that great. Okay. External flashes can help you take more even photos with backlighting. So what an external flash does is that it gives you light kind of across the entirety of where the picture is being taken. So if there's a super dark spot and then there's a super light area, it kind of helps counteract that and make it more even. So I believe I talked about that in the macro photography tutorial as well. If you're into portrait photography, maybe you'd like the main genre of macro. So like I said, I want you guys to check that out if you have the chance on creativeonlineschool.com. Okay? And this is going to be our last slide for lecture 6 here. I apologize if there's some clicks that you hear. Alright, here's another special effect I did not put in the special effect category because it kind of has to do with lighting too. Steel wool and long exposure. Put your camera on a kind of a night setting, long exposure. Ooh, I love the stars in this one. Get some steel wool, a whisk, a lighter, light your steel wool, put it inside the whisk before you light it, of course, and spin it around in circles. The steel wool and the whisk, it's best if you have a piece of rope. Tie a piece of rope to the end of the whisk. Spin it around. Now this is a super far away one, but you can do it so that you can see the person and it's more of a portrait photo. So I spent a little extra time on this lecture just to tell you about that. Bokeh and blur. Alright, so here are some of the most important parts of portrait photography is bokeh and blur. So let's talk about what they are, how important they are, and how you can get them. First of all, what is bokeh? Bokeh is the colorful circles in a picture, are the colorful circles. So here's an example of just straight up bokeh from a light source. If you're an expert Photoshopper, some of you might be, then you can kind of recreate this using Photoshop, but it's best if you can have it natural and it's easier, saves you time, yada yada. Alright, so most people, just going to throw this out there, love bokeh. Some people say it's overrated. I mean, personally, I love it, but don't go too crazy. Alright, how do I get bokeh? One of the easiest ways to get bokeh and that lovely blur is, fortunately and unfortunately, the telephoto lens. So here's a picture of what a telephoto lens looks like, and I've used one before. I've had a family member that lets me borrow it. We're pretty close, and it's just a lovely piece of equipment to have if you're a portrait photographer. Alright, or you can also use a wide aperture. You can keep the person far away from the other objects and light source. That will help you with bokeh and blur. So here's an example of a portrait with bokeh. So you can see that it's not too overwhelming. You know, the main picture isn't bokeh, it's just about maybe a quarter of the picture. And that's from the light from the sun coming through the trees. And so if you notice, the main subject, the guy, is up close, kind of close to the camera, and then the tree and the light source, you know, the sun and the tree, like I said, are pretty far back. And so that's part of what causes the effect of bokeh, which makes the little circles. I mean, some people have mixed feelings about it because when you're looking at a beautiful scene, a beautiful portrait, in real life, you don't see a million little circles, but it is kind of an artsy, nice effect to use sometimes. Alright, and here's a nice photo without bokeh. So you can notice that in the bokeh, it had all of those blurs, and this has a light source, hotel, but the girl is pretty close to the hotel sign, and so that means that it basically had no chance of having bokeh. But it's still kind of nice because the girl's the main subject. You can actually read the letters. If she was super far from the hotel letters, you wouldn't be able to read them. So, like I said, use it sometimes, but not all the time. How to get a nice portrait blur. Use the portrait setting on your camera. The automatic one is just fine, and distance, but you have to have distance if you're going to use the portrait setting. Telephoto lens, like I said, use a low f-stop. Post-production, you can change the depth of field if you're into Photoshop. If you aren't into Photoshop, ignore that and just focus on those 3 steps. Look at your manual if you need to know how to change your f-stop or your aperture, by the way. And special effects were covered in the other chapter, such as how to use smoke, small fireworks, paint, and etc. glow-in-the-dark paint. Alright, and that was in a different chapter. So we already talked about bokeh. Bokeh is kind of a special effect in a way. Alright, thank you for coming to this lecture, and let's move on to lecture 8. Examples of poses for better portraits. Alright, so here we're going to talk about the small facet that is poses. Now, I might say small facet, but it's actually a very important part to making your subjects look as flattering as they can. The subjects can also take on a different attitude and kind of have a different personality for even just from poses. It can be not even just the capturing the personality element, but the pose can contribute to the effect of the personality. So here is kind of a sassy or confident pose. So you can see that her hips are to the side, her foot is kind of turned out, and her arm is up and behind her head, and all of that screams confidence. So if you're working with somebody who wants confident looking pictures, but they're kind of camera shy, then this is a really good basic pose if you're looking for the kind of whole head to toe look. Now, if you just want from head to shoulders down, that's going to be a little bit different of a pose, but this is one of the full body kind of standard confident poses. Alright, now here we have one that's for more of a headshot. Kind of, this is nice for an outdoor headshot. It's a little casual, you know, not for, say, super professional, like if you were an opera singer getting photos done, or, you know, like a consultant. You probably wouldn't want to use this pose, but this is a nice casual pose for, say, senior pictures where the person has their head tilted back, they're smiling, and she's kind of cupping the one side of her face, and then it looks like her one arm is on her hip, kind of relaxed, and the head tilted back gives a little bit more of a personal element to it, a little bit more casual. I really like this pose, especially for pictures that you're going to give away to a lot of people, just kind of as like, hey, I'm here, I'm me, and it's really hard to get your people who you're taking portraits of, your subjects. I feel weird calling them subjects, like, you're a royal subject. No. Anyways, so I feel like this is a really nice basic pose anyways. Here's another good one if you're going for the head to about the hips or the torso, is that your body, the subject's body, is facing one direction, and then their head is the only thing that turns to look at you. It's kind of like they were doing something else. They were walking away, and then they were, you know, they were a friend at the park that you saw at the park, and then they kind of turned and they say, oh, well, hello there. Or they turn to smile at you, and then they're going to continue on their way. So it's a very natural pose as well. Big fan of this one. All right. Now we have the straight ahead one. This is more for a, I think, professional kind of portrait. If you're doing straight up headshots, this is a good one. I'm going to be really picky here and say how I don't like how the photographer cut off the tiniest bit of his hair. I think that's one of the more interesting parts, is how unruly his hair is. I like the curls, but look how symmetrical it is. If you want a serious pose, center their eyes, make everything super symmetrical, and have them look straight on, serious face, and that will make for a really nice professional headshot. There's another kind of over the shoulder look. Hey, oh, I just saw you there. You know, there's another natural pose. Here's a casual action pose. I really like this. I think it's interesting because you take your subject, you put them up high, and then you're down lower, kind of looking up at them, and that's a new angle that not a lot of people explore when it comes to portrait photography. I also like how casual he is. It almost kind of looks like he's doing parkour, so if you're going for more of a senior picture set with street, kind of like street art around you, then this is a really cool pose, is having them higher than where you are in your camera. Alright, and then now I'm going to show you two more that I really enjoy. Okay, Here's the looking away. So this is kind of the exact opposite. The body is facing you, except they're looking away. And it almost shows a little bit of disinterest. And so it comes across as a little more edgy. And that's kind of nice sometimes. It depends on what the person is looking for. And lastly, I thought this was nice. There's this thing called a leading line, where your eyes kind of follow a line throughout the picture. And this is a nice group photo as far as photography goes in the portrait genre. All right, let's move on to lecture